Thank you everybody for taking time out of your schedules to join us here today, this afternoon, for the South Maplewood Century Avenue redevelopment property presentation. For those who have been following along and attending our community focused presentations, this is the third presentation of this planning process to date. Just as a sort of a precursor to getting started here, we have quite a few slides tonight because we are going to be presenting a lot of a summary of background as well as some development scenarios. And so we want to get through that pretty quickly so that we can leave plenty of time for conversation at the end. So this is what our agenda looks like this afternoon. Oh, sped through. So we'll start with a welcome from the mayor and our county board chair. We'll give a quick overview and update of sort of really just process related elements focused on the project. I'll give a summary of the engagement that's happened since the last time we were together in the last community meeting. And then we'll spend a majority of our time talking about what we've identified as site frameworks, some of these development scenarios, as well as polling questions. We're actually going to have some polling questions sort of intermittently throughout this presentation tonight. Then we'll talk about next steps, and then based on how much time we have left, and hopefully we'll have more than 15 minutes, but we'll do open comment period. With that, we are going to start with a welcome, and I'll hand it over to our county board chair, Tony Carter.
And thank you very, very much. I appreciate the opportunity to welcome all here tonight to this meeting, and also for those of you who participated in other meetings. On behalf of the entire Ramsey County Board, and along with Commissioners Reinhardt and Mattis Castillo, who are joining on today's call, I just want to express our appreciation for the ability to hear from county residents and also from other interested parties regarding your ideas and your priorities for how these two properties can be used in the future. We also appreciate hearing from all the individuals and community groups who've offered their thoughts by way of surveys or group or individual conversations that have occurred. So again, thank you. Also, acknowledging the extended time period that's been required for our community engagement on the future of these properties due to the pandemic, the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners has revised the date for the Ponds Golf Course closure. Initially expected prior to the 2021 golf season, it will now remain open until September 10th of this year, at which time, having determined next steps for the properties, the golf course will close. So moving forward from this point, in early May, the County Board will have the opportunity to hear a presentation which Perkins&Will recently provided to the Maplewood City Council. And as we have shared before, as the board decides the eventual reuse of these properties, our decisions will be directly informed by this community engagement process and the work of Perkins&Will. And as with all decisions by the county, we will center racial equity as well as our county's vision of a vibrant community where all are valued and thrive. So once again, with great appreciation for your participation as community and as stakeholders with us in this and past sessions, we also wish to express our appreciation for the work of our city and our county staff, and for that of our Perkins&Will team. Your energy and your thoughtful creativity is greatly welcomed. So please have a wonderful session tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Carter. Now we'll have Mayor Abrams give a welcome.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair Carter. Welcome to the third Ramsey County Maplewood virtual public engagement event concerning the Ponds Golf Course and the vacant parcel of land that is located next to the correctional facility in South Maplewood. I want to start out by clarifying the roles of Ramsey County and the city of Maplewood for those who may be new to this process. Ramsey County owns the 2 parcels of land that are located in Maplewood. The Maplewood City Council is the zoning authority should there be any proposed changes to the current use of the 2 parcels. Further, any proposed changes to the land use would have to be vetted through our robust city commission process, which includes public hearings and an ultimate decision by myself and the Maplewood City Council. I want to thank the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners for their decision last week to reopen the Ponds Golf Course this spring for another season of golf enjoyment. As Chair Carter indicated, the golf course will remain open until September. I also want to thank all of you who are participating with us this afternoon. Your voices and opinions are important and valued. I also want to thank the number of groups that have participated in this process, and thank you to Perkins&Will for providing a structure and a mechanism for all of our voices to be heard. Maplewood has a history of public engagement and listening to our residents and our businesses. We also have great appreciation for our land use, and we value our parks, trails, open spaces, and recreational facilities. One of our guiding principles is that every resident will live within 1/2 mile of a park, a preserve, an open space, or some type of recreational facility in our community. That is because our natural environment impacts the quality of life in our city. I can assure all of you that these principles will not be lost in our discussion or any decisions about the 2 parcels of land. I wanted to share with you this afternoon my vision for the future of these 2 parcels of land. I continue to support the Ponds Golf Course as a true recreational asset in our community, and I'd like to see it maintained as a golf course that can be enjoyed for generations to come. I see the other parcel that is currently undeveloped near the correctional facility to evolve organically to a combination of housing, retail, and in part, some of the abundant wetlands on the parcel to be added to Battle Creek Regional Park. I am but one person in this process, and I care deeply and want to listen and learn about your thoughts and visions for these 2 parcels of land. Your contribution to this process is valued and will help guide our future here in Maplewood. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor. For those who have been participating in these community conversations, this is the design team. We won't have individuals introduce themselves, but these are the people who are on the call today and have been participating in the process throughout. And then from a leadership team standpoint, Martha Faust is with Ramsey County and Michael Martin is with the City of Maplewood. We also have additional partners. So the Institute on the Environment has been a group that has been collaborating with Perkins&Will, I would say, over the last 2 to 3 months. And we're excited to have them on the team, and they bring a lot of depth and research to this process. And you'll get a glimpse of that a little bit later this afternoon. But you'll have Eric, Chris, and Hillary, and Ben. I think most of them are on the phone tonight. And then you'll hear primarily from Eric tonight as part of presentations related to a checklist, essentially a design development checklist related to the development scenarios that we'll be presenting a little bit later. So just again, you know, we all know that we are virtual as part of this meeting, and we just want people to be mindful of some of the potential rules that we have. I think the last 2 meetings have been really great, so we appreciate all of your efforts to make sure that everybody is being heard and that we're respectful. Much like the last meeting, I just want to highlight that you know, we will be recording this and that participants are going to be muted during the presentation portion, and then subsequently the chat will also be off during the presentation portion. And then once we get to the community conversation part, you'll be able to unmute yourself, but then we would ask that you would raise your hand if you want to speak, and we'll go in order of people who have raised their hands. So thank you for doing that. All right, a little bit about overview. I think you've all seen this slide before. Site A is a 77-acre site north of Ramsey County Correctional Facility, and we refer to it as Site A. So as part of this presentation, if we say Site A, you know which site we're talking about. And then Site B is the county-owned 88-acre Ponds at Battle Creek golf course site. I will note that both parcels, Site A and B, are owned by the corrections facility. So Ramsey County Correctional Facility owns both of these parcels. And then a little bit about our project schedule. We're into the 5th month of the process. As you can see here, we're at this 3rd community stakeholder engagement meeting. And we'll talk a little bit about next steps and where we go after this meeting tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa real quick. She's going to do 2 quick polling questions.
Thanks, John. Can you guys see the poll?
Yep.
All right. All right, I'm gonna share the results there. I don't know why it looks like it cut out early, but there we go. So there are the results. Can you guys see that? Okay, I'm just gonna snap that real quick. Okay. All right. John, did you see the total numbers on that, or do you want me to read them out loud?
Why don't you read them out real quick?
Yeah, we've got over 50% from the city of Maplewood there. We've got about 29% from St. Paul, 2% from Woodbury, and 19% for other. And then it looks like some of the highest kind of ranking for your interest in this project is we've got I'm a neighbor, I use the adjacent parks, and I'm a resident of Ramsey County. So those are the 3 kind of top ones in that one. And we'll post these results as part of the summary in this presentation as well.
Great, thank you. All right, now we're going to go into the engagement. So what I want to do is really just try to give you a quick summary of the engagement and the outreach that has happened to this point here. Slide this over. So on the right-hand side, you can see, so from a time frame, November to December, end of last year, there was 3 major engagement components. January, February is when we started stakeholder meetings, which essentially are ongoing. In February, we held our 2nd community meeting, and then a 2nd online survey, and then ongoing meetings for stakeholders. Now I'm going to get in a little bit more detail. So the time frame from November to December at the end of last year, we had our first community meeting. We had over 135 individuals who participated virtually in that meeting. And for those who were at that meeting, if you remember, we did some interactive whiteboard exercises in Miro. Following that was a survey that was up for a little bit over a month. And you can see that we collected almost 500 individual responses to the survey, and the survey questions were basically made up of the same questions that we asked as part of the first community meeting. And then from the standpoint of ongoing sort of emails that were directly sent to Ramsey County or City of Maplewood, there was at least 80 letters, but even to this day today, we continue to get some more. All right, next slide, here we go. And for those who did participate, these were the questions that were asked in both the community meeting and the survey. I won't read through them, but if you did take the survey or were part of the community meeting, you remember that they were really high-level questions that really kind of focused on opportunities, challenges, and a vision for the site. Now the results from primarily the survey, but then also a compilation of the feedback that we got during the public meeting. We really just essentially took that feedback and lumped them and put them into what we'll say are these 5 different categories or 5 different buckets. So the first, and this is not in any specific order, but the first is we heard a lot about the appreciation of natural spaces, the need to preserve, enhance, and really kind of provide for these amenities, including the native plant communities, wildlife, and wetlands. We heard a lot of support for golf, so the opportunity to either maintain the golf course as is, or even potentially expand golf on one or both of these sites. We heard a lot about public recreation, so there was a lot of support for enhanced access to the natural environment through public opportunities, so walking trails, bicycle trails, parks, nature viewing, those kind of things. And we also heard some responses related to community supported land uses, so housing, mixed use. And then last but not least, we heard some feedback regarding food resources, so things like access to community gardens, food safety, and food access. So as we moved into early January, we started to host what we were calling sort of focus group stakeholder meetings. These were groups or individuals that we reached out to based on the input from the project partners being the city and the county. And you can see the 4 specific stakeholder meetings that we've had to this point. So it really represents much diverse groups throughout the county, which they brought a perspective that was maybe more focused on a countywide perspective versus a city perspective. So a very diverse set of stakeholder groups and conversations. And I will note that we are planning to continue these conversations as we move through the planning process, continue to reach out to different community groups, BIPOC community resources. Some of the things that we heard through these stakeholder meetings, the process for these meetings was very similar to our public meetings. We had sort of a series of questions that were intended to prompt conversation, but really it was about listening to these organizations and trying to identify their needs and desires within the community, specifically for these sites. And so some of the things that we heard a lot about neighborhood identity, the need to reinforce the identity of the community. We heard a need for a mix of housing types. We heard about food access and community supported agriculture. We heard about the need for expanded public transit, as well as multimodal access to these sites. We heard about equitable development and affordable housing. We heard about the need to do a more robust environmental assessment of these properties to really understand sort of the critical landscapes that exist on these sites. And then we also heard the needs for some community resources, primarily in the form of a community center or a public space like that. In January, late January, we held our second community meeting. We had over 130 individuals participated, and we primarily focused on presenting essentially some frameworks, some ideas for how these sites might develop in the future. And we did a lot of polling as part of that meeting. And then subsequently, we turned those same polling questions into an online survey, which received 335 responses through the end or middle of February. These were those specific questions from that second meeting in the polling survey. And one of the things that we started to track more closely was where we were getting respondents. So this really highlights the 335 responses from the survey. And so you can see basically Maplewood outlined here in the black, and you can see a majority of our respondents were from the 55119 zip code, which is partially Maplewood, but also partially St. Paul, and then 55109, which is primarily all of Maplewood. There was about 4%, and then there was some others in adjacent areas. And ultimately, there's 57% of online polling that came outside of these 5 kind of adjacent zip codes. Some of the things that we talked about as part of the survey, kind of really focus on job creation and increasing tax base. And you can see some of the responses that people that were directly adjacent to or outside didn't think that these sites should support job creation, nor did they think that they should increase the tax base. Here's sort of a summary of a little bit more detailed summary of some of the responses to the survey. And we really categorize these in kind of the 5 key topic areas, or the 4 key topic areas of open space, commercial development, public institution, and housing. And what this does is just kind of show down a breakdown of where some of the preferences lie as it relates to each of these kind of key categories. And then, as I mentioned, we're continuing to hold some of these broader community countywide stakeholder meetings. And then these are some of the different groups that we're looking to meet with in the future as we move forward with this project. We do have a potential meeting set up with the Hmong 18 Council, but then there's a couple of other organizations that you can see here listed that we've either reached out to or are waiting to hear back from as a way to broaden sort of the engagement to ensure that all residents of the county are heard as part of this planning process. So I will transition now into what we are calling site frameworks. So based on the wealth of community input that we've received through this process, as well as the ongoing conversations that we're having with some of these community conversations or these other community groups, we wanted to start to strategize about what future development might look like on these sites. And ultimately, as part of our approach, we are going to present to you tonight just a couple of different scenarios for what development might look like. Please note that these are not the scenarios that are gonna. This is not what's going to be built on the site. We're not going to select a scenario tonight as a preferred scenario. What these scenarios do is just really give you some different options to really understand how different land uses, how different recreation opportunities, how preservation of natural systems might be balanced on these 2 sites. So with that approach, what we've decided to do is, as part of final recommendations, we'd like to move forward recommendations around what we're calling these site frameworks. And what we've are going to show here tonight is that as part of any future redevelopment on either of these 2 sites, we'd like to recommend that a future development needs to include these 6 items, these 6 bullets, and I'll read through them in a second. And so part of what we'll do at the end of the site frameworks slide is actually do another poll just to gauge the sort of the response about what these site frameworks are calling out for. So the first site framework that we think should be included on either site, if the sites were to be redeveloped in the future, is that there needs to be publicly accessible open space, and that needs to partially be accommodated through a trail network on the sites. We also believe that there needs to be some sort of community space for gardening or urban agriculture. So, that could take many shapes or forms. It could be many different sizes or many different types of urban agriculture, but that there should be a place for that on either site. We think that we should be preserving some of the ecologically sensitive areas and enhance ecological systems on these sites. Hence, on the previous slides where there was a call for an enhanced survey of the ecological systems on the sites. We do think that we should be preserving the best natural features on each of these sites. We think that each site should do its part to enhance stormwater management. And so that should be part of any future redevelopment opportunity. We believe that each site should have improved access up and beyond sort of the accessibly open space, but improved access, which also could include expanded transit or connectivity to transit. And then we also lastly believe that each of these sites, if redeveloped in the future, should be sensitive to its neighbors. And I think that's primarily from a land use standpoint. So ensuring that what is built on these sites is compatible with adjacent land uses. So we're going to go into another polling question. So the question, input from previous meetings about the future sites A and B revealed 6 common elements that could serve as a foundation or frameworks for considering future development. Which of these elements would you consider as the highest priority? And so we'd like you to pick what you think is the highest priority.
I'll let you know when the numbers slow down there, John. Got a few more rolling in. I'm just gonna give it another 15 seconds or so. Can you see the results, John?
I can.
Okay.
So based on the number of people that voted, it looks like preservation of ecologically sensitive areas received the most positive feedback. I think that's 38 votes, so about 47%. Tied for second, public accessible open space, and then also sensitivity to neighbors. Great. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, and Eric's going to walk us through what we're simply calling a checklist. And this was developed by Eric and his group at the Institute on the Environment to sort of help create as an evaluation tool. And so I think Eric's going to get into more detail about the goals of the tool, and then you'll hear as we get into the development scenarios, Eric will chime in and talk about some of the outcomes from this checklist.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so based on the feedback, we've been part of these meetings and listening in and working with John and others at Perkins&Will. And we've been working to try to kind of help develop some criteria or an evaluation tool to illustrate how well each of the potential designs that could be created for future development could respond to a lot of the concerns that the community has been stating. And we've tried to organize these around several broad goals that have been should be reflected in the things that the county has said, some stakeholders have said, the city has said, such as housing, recreation, transportation, cultural services, the revenue generated by the sites, economic well-being, the environment, and then ultimately equity and access as well. And so we'll get into the details of what we mean by each of these broad goals. Next slide.
Hang on a second.
Okay.
There we go.
Here it comes. Very dramatic. So from this broad goals, we'd like to use the kind of the details in each of these to try to reveal all the ways that each of these properties can provide value to the community beyond just the dollars. Right? You know, we've talked about trails and recreation and wildlife. So we want to try to use this process to create a values-driven process for redevelopment that can be communicated to anyone who might be redeveloping the site, in addition to those things that were listed in the checklist. So and by using this lens to kind of see what can happen, we can better understand what the sites can and can't contribute. You know, there are limitations to what can be changed on the sites based on topography and soil and runoff and things like that. But to try to be creative to avoid trade-offs amongst these, right? So I know there's a lot of interest around maintaining the golf course, but also providing potential opportunities for housing and providing, you know, protection for the environment. What are ways we can organize changes in redevelopment to minimize the trade-offs among those kinds of goals? Okay, and so what we've been doing is to kind of use this to generate ideas for redevelopment to try to take into all these considerations at once. You know, if there was a way to have all of this provided on these sites, that would be great. So let's start with that and see how far we can get. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this provides sort of this overarching kind of framework for what each scenario of land use change or redevelopment change could provide. The total value coming from the economy through the prosperity of the community and government revenue, society, and this is where we organize like opportunities for transportation, providing space for housing, recreation, cultural services, and finally environment, which we split into water, climate, and wildlife habitat. And I'm not going to go into all of these right now, but they translate down into kind of these individual metrics that we can kind of capture on the sites. All right, next slide. So for housing, we recognize that the communities are changing and we need to meet the need of a growing community. A lot of concern for providing low-income housing for more equitable and diverse communities. So we can keep track of then the number of units for single families, multifamily, or low income for that diversity in each plan. Next slide. And we can also keep track of—
Sorry about that.
That's right, opportunities for recreation, right? And we know that from studies, particularly now where we're not allowed to see other people except outside, recreation provides opportunities for mental and physical health, connecting to people in a socially distant manner, and then enhancing that quality of life by providing, for instance, golf, hiking trails, park space, ball fields or courts, playgrounds, picnic areas, water play and fishing. All these things could potentially be provided on these sites, right? Next slide. There are opportunities for cultural services, you know, to bring the community places where the community can gather, connect, like community gardens and farms, cultural centers. We didn't find opportunities for historic preservation, but that's a possibility in spaces like this. Could be opportunities for public art. Some of the landscapes could be edible, like providing fruits and things, and ultimately just overall community gathering spaces. So let's try to find some places for that in these designs too. And at the same time, we're creating spaces for that. We want to be cognizant of protecting the environment and taking advantage of the contributions that nature can provide people, like through water mitigating storms and heavy rainfall, guarding against pesticide runoff and nutrient runoff, understanding that climate change and mitigating against climate is important. There could be potential for, you know, solar panels and renewable energy, and then also providing habitat for the birds and the bees, and then also core habitats for, you know, forest, protecting what forest is there, grassland, and the aquatic habitats too. So doesn't have to be sort of an either or problem to solve. We can try to provide for the environment as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now that we've kind of listed through, we kind of identified a few of these. We want to explore how these are the sort of the criteria or lens that we can now evaluate development opportunities at sites A and B. So we want to explore how those two spaces contribute to the total social value, right? The total value of the community for the city and the county, represented by these broad goals and sort of the details we're trying to get at. And so since these aren't the actual plans, right, we don't know exactly what those are going to be. This is really an opportunity to try to see what those spaces could provide, to kind of learn what those are, and again, identify which goals might have some trade-offs and which goals actually can be met together. And I think we have poll question. All right, so based on sort of that overview, how well do these topic areas in the checklist capture some of your personal values regarding the sites? Are some missing? Yeah.
All right, we're right at about 80%. I'll give it 10 more seconds here or so. All right, I'm gonna end the poll.
So somewhat well, that's good. So part of this is providing another opportunity for feedback. And so after, we'll open it up for chat and can provide some specifics about what needs to be added to kind of to fill out the full scope of value here. But at least it's mostly positive. That's good. All right, so next slide.
Excellent. So what we're going to do now is walk you all through a series of design scenarios that have been developed for both Site A and Site B. Again, you know, these are not scenarios that we're going to vote on and pick what we think is the best scenario for these sites. These are really just ideas for each site based on the feedback that we've received and utilizing this evaluation checklist that Eric just talked about. And so subsequently, as we go through this, just keep in mind that we wanted to provide a broad spectrum of different development opportunities on each site, just so you can see how each site balances a lot of the different components from the checklist. And then as I'll give a high level overview of the design scenario, and then Eric will sort of just highlight how it sort of fills in the checklist components and how the checklist outcomes sort of respond to each of those scenarios. So here's sort of a continuum of our approach to developing these scenarios. And what we wanted to do was go from basically less to more. And so each site will have a development scenario that basically is a no build. And so for Site A, you know, the first design scenario will essentially be site remains as is. As we move into what we were calling cluster, it's essentially a minimal light touch footprint on the site. And so it'll be primarily focused on small lot, single family in cluster formations. So really kind of clustered tightly together, which allows us to preserve and maximize the open space. Each of the concepts, much tying back to our design frameworks, will include not only the preserved open space, but then also public accessibility, as well as some sort of community garden or agricultural element. The third concept starts to get, or a scenario starts to get a little bit more dense. It starts to incorporate actually just a wider variety of single family housing. So some small lot, some large lot. But then it obviously includes the open space, the trails, and community garden. And then the fourth scenario that we'll present for Site A, we'll call mixed use crossroads. What it does is it starts to increase the density and starts to include more residential unit types. And so I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. All right, so let's go. All right, Site A. Oh.
Up.
Oh, I think this the wrong image, right? Yep, unfortunately. So apologies here, but this is supposed to be an image of the site with no development on it. And so you can see here, Site A1, no build. site remains essentially county-owned land. It's vacant, and its existing systems stay as is on the site.
Yeah, and so if we, imagine that there was no buildings on here and it was just grass. So when we evaluate sort of these broader goals, in each of the metrics in here, we would see that there aren't any family units, no opportunity for golf on site A, no trails that you're supposed to be using, no parks, no ball fields, nothing for recreation, low cultural services. It's basically just natural areas. So it's the environment is being supported, but nothing really for people. Okay, and then when we see the next one where this footprint will be relevant, these should change.
Yeah, so in the cluster development, as you can see, we've intended this to be just a really light touch, and it's primarily focused on small lot single family. So small lot in the sense that there could be a higher percentage of potentially affordable units tied to these smaller lots, and then each of the clusters kind of focuses around its own sort of neighborhood open space. And then subsequently allows for more of the site to be preserved. So this is a pretty low density overall. You can see that there's new trails identified in the white. There's a primary access road that comes into the site. And that access road terminates into a parking lot at sort of the western edge of the site. And that's where a pretty large community garden could be located. So with the scale of this community garden and the fact that it includes a parking lot, we'd see this as sort of a county-wide resource. So people could get a community garden plot from anywhere within the county and come here to garden.
Yeah, and so I'll just add that so there would be some moderate opportunities for recreation with the trails, and that with the environment, there's still a lot of natural space, so there's still good support for the environment and kind of the services it can provide.
The third concept, which is the one we called Enclave, actually starts to densify the site a little bit more, but kind of keeps it towards more focused on single family housing. And so what you're seeing here is really a mix of single family, different sizes, as well as potentially some townhomes and twin homes, likely on the larger parcels located on the north part of this access road. And again, maintaining a majority of the site for open space and natural resources, incorporating a trail system, providing some buffer on the south end to protect views and access from basically the correctional facility site. And then in this concept, there is a small sort of focused community garden element that essentially is just as you access the site, and there'll be a small parking lot to support that.
Yeah, so we can use the same broad goals here. So there's more housing now, so moderate amounts of housing. Again, sufficient, recreation opportunities are about the same as the last one, but now there's a little bit less for cultural services. There's no community farm, but there is a kind of a smaller garden. And then the environmental services aren't, I think this should probably be medium or low now, but they're sort of decreased because of the broader footprint, the bigger development footprint. Okay.
And then the last scenario starts to look at how a parcel could start to support a lot more density. And again, this is not a scenario that is a scenario that necessarily will be built, but likely with the large parcel size, any developer might push to include more housing. And so what we're showing here is a mix again of some single family, some twin townhomes, and then potentially apartment buildings. And when we say apartment buildings within the context of these scenarios, it could be anything from assisted living to apartments to condos, with the eye on that through each of these scenarios is that we're really trying to provide as part of the overall frameworks, just trying to provide some thoughts on how each of these sites might densify from that original A1, which was the no build, to A4, which would be, you know, pretty much of a built out scenario. And then in this scenario, again, you know, still preserving more than half of the site for open space, recreation, natural systems, much smaller community garden component in the brown here. And then likely this first residential component could support some first floor retail because there is a transit stop pretty close by. And so this is what we see as a scenario where maybe the most density happens, but then it balances that with the environment.
I think you've covered all the broad goals pretty well there. So
excellent. So this is sort of what each of those concepts look like. So if we put all four on the sheet, you can see how we go from a scenario where it's a no build scenario, everything remains as is, to a sort of a light touch from a residential standpoint, to a medium touch, to a sort of a full build out density, and then how we integrate in the trails, the preservation of the natural systems and the ecologies, incorporation of community garden, and then additional amenities like playgrounds and potentially fishing and other things that necessarily we're not going to highlight, but that are included as part of this checklist. And even though we're not going to show sort of the full checklist as part of this meeting, because it's a really kind of complex series of different spreadsheets, we will include that as part of sort of final documentation so that you can kind of see all the different variables that went into the detail that's sort of being presented tonight. So as we shift to site B, these were the design scenarios that we sort of initially identified, and then subsequently we'll show you what those scenarios look like graphically. But the first no build is essentially the golf course remains as golf course. The second we're calling urban reserve, and in this concept, the idea here is that we would maintain some sort of golf component. So in this case, you maintain the clubhouse, the parking, and the golf range, and then parts of the site get developed. So in this concept, we'll show, or scenario will show, some single-family residential, and then some of the key frameworks from previous slides include, you know, preserving, enhancing open space, public trails, community garden, agriculture. The third scenario, which will be a little bit more dense, starts to incorporate more residential housing, really kind of focused in on different typologies, as well as supporting different income levels, and again includes the enhanced open space, public trails, and community garden agriculture. And then the last one is likely the most dense of any concept on either site, incorporates many more land uses, many more different typologies of residential and income levels. We're showing in this scenario the opportunity for a grocery store. So to think about a little bit about food security and food access a little bit differently, a grocery store, but in this concept, I also highlight that the grocery store and the footprint and supporting parking could also serve as a public community use, so like a community center or a resource center. This is also a concept that actually starts to talk a little bit more and integrate a little bit more around jobs, and then obviously the open space, public trails, and community garden. So for the first option, again, the site remains as a golf course. And so what you're seeing here in this scenario is we didn't change anything as it relates to the golf course.
right, and so it's not providing, from in terms of these broad goals, you know, the golf course is providing golf, but none of the other recreational amenities, no housing, right? Nothing is included yet for cultural services, but it's a nice natural area, so it's providing, you know, pretty good services there. Sort of the base. Yeah.
Yep. So the second scenario we called urban reserve, and in this scenario, what we're looking at doing is maintaining the clubhouse, which is shown here in white, parking lot, portion of the parking lot, and then the driving range. And then from a redevelopment standpoint, we're looking to bring in primarily just single family. And again, this is looking at small lot single family. And what's nice about this scenario is that each of these small lot single family, they face out to essentially community open space. On the southern portion of the site, you can see a sort of a dual purpose. So we see the clubhouse and the parking serving also a large community garden. So you can imagine people from throughout the county can come here, park in the parking lot, use potentially some additional programming or services that might come out of the clubhouse to support community garden functions. And then looking at to really preserving and enhancing all the open space that is just south of that clubhouse. Again, trail system in the white, enhanced landscaping in and around some of the natural features and elements.
Yeah, and I think you covered most of the broad goals there because of the emphasis on kind of protecting the major environmental resources that are present, right? Most of those are still maintained. Okay, so.
Yep. Third scenario, we're calling the village. And so what this scenario does is essentially takes away anything related to golf. So moves away from the first two scenarios and starts to integrate more mix of housing types and densities. And so you're seeing a mix of small lot, single family. You're seeing integration of potentially some twin homes or townhomes. And then in the brown, you're seeing sort of the integration of, again, what we're calling apartments, but potentially could be other types of more dense housing, just to really provide more of a mix on the site. Each of the sort of single family or twin home, townhome areas also has sort of their own sort of active community space in the form of sort of green space. And then as you can see, expanded trail system, enhanced natural resources. So really looking at what we can do to improve the environmental quality of the existing site, taking away the golf holes and turning those back into prairie and meadow and things like that. And then on the southern portion of the site, to be able to maintain some sort of larger community garden component, because these are large sites. We have basically a separate parking lot and a separate community garden component on the south end of the site.
And then in our assessment, I think, John, you've covered sort of the housing, recreation, and cultural services. From the environmental side, there is a little bit more impervious surface probably in this design. So it does impact a little bit of like some of those services, like urban cooling is reduced, the potential for that, so.
And then the last scenario, what we're calling sort of neighborhood center. So this is really the most dense scenario of any scenario for either site. And what you're seeing here is in yellow again is primarily twin homes, townhomes, and then the really thin yellow ones potentially are row homes. The brown represents more dense buildings, and so likely these are apartments or assisted living or other types of larger scale apartment, higher density housing. And you can see that everything's really focused in on a community green. So in the center of the site, sort of the confluence of all the major circulation components comes to a community green. And then you have some of these higher density uses that face out to the community green. So you can imagine in a scenario like this that each of these sort of larger buildings would also have some sort of retail, small scale retail on the ground floor. On the right hand side here, you see two larger footprints, colored red, so primarily retail, direct access. And the one on the north side is what we had initially called out as a grocery store. So thinking about how food access might be changed a little bit in this scenario, but then this could also, in lieu of a grocery store, could also be a community facility. So this could be a rec center, this could be a cultural center, community center for some of our BIPOC communities, but it provides an opportunity on a site to create a little bit more synergy and a max density of uses and compatible land uses sort of in the northern part of the site here. And then you can see there's another larger, denser development at the north. And then, there's this edge once you about halfway through the site on the south side. There's just there is some developable areas from our analysis, but they're really hard to access and they're pretty small. And so each of these scenarios really looks at maintaining everything basically in the south portion as primarily natural space or recreation space. So you can see sort of the trails that wind through these open spaces. And then in this scenario, we also include that large community gardening space.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of finish this up by kind of commenting again on this is a slightly more intense development. So it has sort of the trade-off with the environment there. And we're going to get into a much more detailed evaluation of all these scenarios in a second.
All right, so this is what all four of those scenarios look like stacked up next to each other. Again, the first one was the no build, so golf course remains as is, no major improvements to anything. B takes a sort of a light touch, maintains a clubhouse, driving range, and starts to bring in some single family small lot development, and then really improves a majority of the site from the standpoint of access and circulation and recreational amenities and natural systems, and then incorporates a pretty large community garden, urban ag component. 3 takes that a little bit further, removes all the recreational amenities associated with golf, but also incorporates a larger trail system, and then more housing types. So single family transitioning into townhomes or twin homes, as well as starting to see some higher density residential. And then again, maintaining a lot of the natural systems and open spaces, and then incorporating a pretty significant community ag piece on the south end. And then last scenario is the most dense scenario. It gives you the most options from the standpoint of a variety of different housing. So row houses, twin homes, townhomes, apartments, potentially other types of larger, more dense housing, all focused in around a central community open space. More opportunities for a little bit more focused retail, not only standalone, but in the first floor of some of these buildings, mixed use buildings, and then provides pretty significant space for either a grocery store or a focused public use like a community center, and then trail system and the community gardens on the south.
All right, so this looks a little complicated here, but I'll try to walk you through it. So with all of the details of our specific, the broad goals that we laid out related to the economy, societal goals, and the environment, and we have specific objectives, we can kind of summarize how well each one of these scenarios at each site can score against each of sort of these broader goals that we've heard about. That at least 2/3 of you, it sounded like, thought these were representing your what you've heard fairly well. So I just want to kind of point out to kind of illustrate one example. I think we have the next slide sort of grays out all but one example. Yeah, so let's focus, on the kind of site B, the original, right? So original golf course. So it was sort of a single, we might think of it as like a single function unit, right? They provided for golf. And we talked about it kind of focusing on golf. It does well with the environment, but it's sort of, you can see all the open circles here. The kind of filled circle means it's doing a good job of addressing that specific objective. The open circles represent that it's not really contributing to those. All right, and so now let's kind of go back to get a sense of kind of how this is working. We can go to the next slide. And so as we get more and more development on each of the sites, we see more of sort of the recreational, the kind of social goals being filled in. We lose golf though, so that's sort of an obvious trade-off there for site B. And that because there's still a lot of natural space, the contribution to wildlife habitat does degrade a little bit, but there's still some in all of them. There's options for renewable energy, addressing climate, water is taken care of. Okay, so the other thing to think about as you look at this is that these are really two potentially independent sites, right? So you can think of like, how could we pair up one from column A, one from the A column, and one from the set of B columns to kind of get as many of those circles filled in, right? So if we kept golf, we could, you could imagine getting A4 and B1, and you'd have lots of the circles filled in at least one site. Okay, so as we think about sort of the multiple desires that we might want from these sites, and as you think about interacting with the developer and the county kind of moving forward, there are opportunities to kind of be creative about how we use these two sites. Anything to add, John?
Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back. No, I think this does a really great job of graphically representing, I think, a lot of the metrics that went into the checklist. And so, there's a ton of different metrics on here that we are not going to talk about specifically, but, even things like the amount of park space or ball fields or playground areas or fishing pond with access or picnic barbecue. We went through each concept to see if these specific components could fit within each concept, and ultimately were able then to put into the metrics that that those were contributing. And so there are a lot of things here that we're not going to highlight, but that are included as part of really trying to balance the needs of what we're hearing from the community and the neighbors with the needs that we're hearing from the broader cross section of diverse countywide users, as well as the needs from related to what the county board chair presented at the last meeting as it relates to the values and the county's goals, around affordable housing, economic competitiveness, really thinking about public parks and open spaces for the next generation. And so this was really an exercise in trying to balance all of those needs. All right, now next slide.
Okay, so some kind of final thoughts on this kind of evaluation. So remember, the goal here was to just sort of evaluate what the potential for these to provide the full value was from these particular sites. But from our perspective, I think there are, this is part of a broader set of decisions, right? The site's going to be sold. There's choices that can be made with the revenue from the sale, right? So some of the issues in the broad goals could be met in other locations, right? From the resources that are generated from that sale, right? So it's not just about what's happening on the site here. And that can also, those kind of decisions can contribute in addition to what happens on these sites to improving the values for the community. We weren't as able to get at equitable availability of resources because we were just focused on these two sites. So what that means regarding other places in Maplewood or in the county just weren't covered here. Recognize that. And then there are also components of value that can only be provided by the site itself, like connection to the trail systems. But some of those can be potentially provided elsewhere, like you could go elsewhere to kind of achieve some of the recreational opportunities, right? You could go somewhere else to play soccer. And depending on where you live or what decision you're making, I just want to point out that like what you value and what you see as the most important thing is probably going to depend on what, what role you're playing in this community. If you're, in the neighborhood, part of the city, part of the county, or even beyond, and you wanted to come here and play golf. And so we recognize that, the complexity of that, and just kind of emphasize like having this kind of transparent scoring system, and just to see sort of what the possibility is to try to meet all of these diverse goals is going to be, I think, helpful moving forward.
So John, we're going to launch the last poll for today. I think that there's a slide after this that maybe will be most helpful for the polling questions. It's just the same summary. So yeah,
Okay.
I think if we just pause on this, I'm going to go ahead and launch the polling. There are 9 questions, so this will take a little bit, and I'll just let you know when we get up to around the 85% respondent rate, which is where we've been.
So I'll read the questions since there's 3 of them. The first, how useful do you consider the checklist for purposes of evaluating potential design scenarios for each site? Very useful, somewhat useful, not too useful, not useful at all. Second question, how much of the balance do you feel there is between developed and open spaces for natural landscapes and wildlife in the designs that include new construction or new development? So very balanced, somewhat balanced, not too balanced, not balanced at all. And the last question, how well do the design scenarios meet the broader goals as identified by the county? Oh, there's actually more. I thought there was 4. Very well, somewhat well, not too well, not well at all. Number 4, when thinking about the community's need for housing, do you think the design scenarios present the opportunity range of options? Yes or no? Question number 5, when thinking about the community's need for retail, do you think the design scenarios present an appropriate range of options? Yes or no? Number 6, when thinking about the community's need for accessible open space, again, do you think that the design scenarios present an appropriate range of options? Yes or no? You're seeing a trend here. Do you or anyone you know have an interest in community gardening? Yes or no question. Number 8, how valuable do you feel community garden or edible landscapes, including fruiting trees, shrubs, raised beds and boulevards, or vegetables, etc., would be to the neighborhood? Very valuable, somewhat valuable, not too valuable, not valuable at all. And then the last question, would the extension of transit service along Century Avenue benefit future development? Yes or no?
Hey, John, can you go back to the one that has all the scenarios on? I think the slides advanced on their own. Thank you.
Should be here, right?
Just one more.
One more.
There you go. We're at about 48% voted right now, so we'll give it another minute or so, I think. We're at about 75, so I'm going to give it a little more time. right, I'm gonna end the polling here. I think we've got everybody, or I've got, it's significantly slowed down. So I'm gonna end this poll.
All right, so first question, how useful do you consider this checklist for the purposes of evaluating potential design scenarios for each site? Somewhat useful, received 42 votes, so over 50% of the voting, and then very useful, looks like it came in second with 23% of the votes. How much of a balance do you feel there is between developed and open spaces for natural landscapes and wildlife in the designs that include new construction? So essentially balancing redevelopment with the existing natural features on the site. Somewhat balanced received 42% of the vote. Not too balanced was 26%. Not balanced at all, 19%. Third question, how well do the design scenarios meet the broader goals as identified by the county? Somewhat well at 50%, and then not too well at 23%. Number 4, when thinking about the community's need for housing, do you think the design scenarios present an appropriate range of options? Yes, received 62% of the votes. Question number 5, when thinking about the community's need for retail, do you think the design scenarios present an appropriate range of options? Yes, received 58% of the votes. Number 6, when thinking about the community's need for accessible open space and preservation of natural resources, do you think the design scenarios present an appropriate range of options? Yes, received 53% of the votes, and no received 47% of the votes. So very close there. Number 7, do you or anyone you know have an interest in community garden? No, 51%, yes, 49%. Question number 8, how valuable do you feel a community garden or edible landscapes would be to the neighborhood? Somewhat valuable received the most votes at 33%, very valuable at 26%, and not too valuable right behind that at 23%. And then the last question, would the extension of transit service along South Century Avenue benefit future development? No at 51% and yes at 49%, so very close there. Great. Again, we will document those responses. Let's go. So we surprisingly have done really well with time. So it's going to allow us to have more opportunities to open up our presentation for public comment. But before we get there, this is sort of next steps in the process. So again, thank you for participating and your continued interest in this project. You can continue to follow the progress of this project on the City of Maplewood's project website, as you can see there, maplewoodmn.gov/ponds. As I mentioned earlier in the community engagement section, we are continuing to try to connect with some of these regional, county-wide partners and organizations to continue to have conversations with them to talk about really broader needs on a county-wide perspective from these user groups. And we'll continue to do that for likely the next month, plus or minus. We have, as the County Commissioner Carter mentioned, in early May, we will be presenting to the county board. And so we will have a draft report publicly available at that time, but we will continue to work on that through April here. The date and timing of that meeting was just recently decided on. And so the May timeframe is when that document will be available for review. With that, we are going to start community comments. We are scheduled to go till 6, so we actually have 40 minutes. So we did really well on the presentation part. And so I think we're at a point where what we're going to do is I'm going to actually close stop sharing the PowerPoint because we're done with the presentation. And what we're going to do is open it up. For those who have raised your hand, we're going to try and call you as best as we can in the order that you raised your hand. And then subsequently, you should be able to unmute yourself when you ask your question. So with that, Jay is, do you know who was first? Was it Marley's?
I think Marlis was the first one to get
Marlis?
in there.
Okay.
Yes,
So,
I looked at your development schemes, and the one thing I'm really concerned about with respect to the community gardens is we have substantial deer herd here. And not only deer herd, but we have wild turkeys. In fact, they were roaming through our association the other day. Are you planning on fencing these community gardens? Because if you don't, nobody's going to be able to grow anything in these gardens. And I looked at especially site B3 and site, was it 2, A2, where it's up against the Battle Creek area. Nobody will be able to grow things in those areas because the deer will just be drawn to those areas like a magnet. I'm all for community gardens, but placement or how you're going to protect them is going to be a big problem.
yeah, thanks for the comment, and we will definitely keep that into consideration. As you can tell, these scenarios are intended to be really loose and at a high level, and were intended to just really represent some potential different design ideas for how these sites might develop. And but that's a really good point, and I think as part of final documentation, we're going to include some narrative around some of these key frameworks that we identified, and we will definitely include in that narrative around the community gardens or community ag spaces, just the idea about fencing and protection to be able to ensure that those facilities serve the needs that they're intended to. So thank you for the response.
Next up is Matthew E.
Hello, hi everyone. So I have a 2-minute and 22-second speech I prepared, but before I add my community comment, I'd like to say that we could have everything that we want. I don't see why we don't look at like larger development, such as like a large condo where the driving range is, and then leave the rest of the golf course there. It'd be equivalent housing if we put the parking underneath or something like that. And so with that, I just want to say that we should all be flexible as community. And then I'm also going to give a prepared statement.
My name is Matthew Emerson. I work to promote resources and recovery for formerly incarcerated men and women. I once lived in the facility in discussion. I remember leaving that facility at the age of 19 with no resources and nowhere to go. I am grateful for the programs the community has developed in this facility, such as when Mr. Osgood came in from Twin Cities Rise to inspire people to work or find education. One thing I know about this land is that the incarcerated men took care of the pig farm that fed Maplewood and Ramsey County. After that, the incarcerated men and women have tendered the golf course that the golfers community enjoys. We recognize the heritage of golf in this discussion as a Scottish-born game that consumes a lot of land that is originally Lakota land. And I want this to be recognized tonight as we move forward in this discussion. I do recommend a drop-in center for people who leave the facility who do not have anything or anywhere to go, in response to the way this community failed me as homeless youth. An effort to use this land to increase Somalian home ownership rate in Ramsey County higher than 4% of the Somalian community. Create an educational program to help people understand nature, which doesn't mean people need to learn to golf to do that. Finally, as a community, do we really need corrections to be forcing inmates to take care of the golf course? This is viewed as oppressive in Ramsey County and Maplewood, and is resented for multiple generations. If anyone listening didn't know that before today, my hope is we can follow the leaders of Washington to rethink incarceration in Maplewood, Ramsey County, and Minnesota. Instead of having a revolving door facility in the lower part of Maplewood, could we think sincerely about providing a controlled studio apartment-like housing, view Norway prison model? For the incredibly short time, these inmates are only here for sentences less than a year. If a person is in this meeting and found any of the information I conveyed as surprising or new, I highly recommend you go have a conversation with neighbors that have been affected by mass incarceration in America, please.
Thank you, Matthew, for the statement and the question. And I will sort of reiterate, I've tried to here real quickly go through the chat as well, and there's a lot of questions about different options for the different scenarios, and did we consider this and did we consider that? And we as part of this design process, working with our design partners as well as the city and the county, we developed numerous options, and ultimately it was decided that because we're not going to move a preferred option forward as part of this study. We're really just showing development potential on the study, and this sort of goes to the original question that you asked, Matthew, about more density on one part of the site. Is we all know that this site and these sites could be developed in any number of ways, and that ultimately we would never be able to really develop a plan as part of a planning process like this that ultimately would be built, because there are so many other metrics that go into redevelopment, like pro formas and funding opportunities, and just a level of analysis for each of the existing sites that would have to happen as part of that, including environmental review. And so our goal was ultimately then to just show a range of how these sites could be developed in the future and the possibilities, and then really try to balance that with everything that we've heard from you, from the other stakeholders, from the standpoint of community, as well as from the county goals and values, and try to show how that could be represented on each of these sites in a specific manner. And so if and when either site does get redeveloped, I guarantee you it will not look like what we presented here tonight. But our hope is that with the frameworks that we developed, so those 6 key frameworks, that as key recommendations moving forward to the county, that they use that as a resource to ensure that any development that happens on any of these sites includes those 6 key components, which are all things that we heard through engagement. Again, focused on accessibility and access, focused on preservation of the most important natural systems and features on these sites, inclusion of some sort of community garden component, and the additional things that we kind of talked about. So hopefully that answers many of the questions related to different development scenarios.
Next up, John, is Robin Sandquist.
Hi, Robin. Are you able to unmute?
Nope.
Oh.
Now it did. It wasn't letting me.
There you go.
Thank you for this presentation. It was very informative, and I had a couple of concerns looking at this, like improving transportation down Century. Already in South Maplewood, we are lacking in sidewalks on dangerous roads. Is that something that's been considered? One of our worst is Highwood. I'm also looking at where you're putting in fields, and I know what the golf course looks like, and also as a physical education teacher, I'm saying, where in the world are you going to fit a soccer field or a ball field or things like that? Because it's not really listed in the picture with that. It was something I was thinking about. And then concerns about community together. There are parks in Battle Creek already that are out there that can take care of that need. So those are just a couple of flags that came up that I wanted to bring up.
Thank you, Robin. Is Jay, is it Richard now? Richard
Yes,
Moore?
next
Okay.
one is Richard Moore.
Hi, Richard. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Okay, there I am. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks for the presentation and for all these forums you've had. I've got a few comments and questions, I guess. One is, I'm really concerned that, to me, open space, green space is very valuable to communities. And I know Maplewood has made some effort to do that in the past. We have our Applewood Park and other things, which is great. But I think they're very valuable to communities, to the health of the community, and also to the making them vibrant and places people want to live. And so I'm concerned, given all the comments that went on in the initial polling, what happened to the thought of just having open space with trails? And also, I think there was talk of connecting trails on Site A to Battle Creek Park, which I think makes a lot of sense. So I would like to, in some sense, leave it open space, because once you build on it, you can't get it back to open space anymore. And those are beautiful open spaces that I think we should have. Personally, I don't see what any use for retail would be on those sites at all. There's plenty of retail within a mile of these sites that's established. I just don't think having the extra traffic and congestion is necessary at all. Community gardens, I'll agree with the lady that talked first. Yeah, the deer, I don't even have a garden anymore. The deer are just ridiculous. You can't keep them out. You need 10-foot high fences. And then most of the community gardens I've seen tend to be very unsightly. You've got multiple plots, different people growing different things. If I was to buy a house, and I wouldn't want it backing onto a community garden, because they tend, to me, they just tend to be unsightly, and then you have people coming and going and working on them. So if you're going to have them, I like the option of having them more isolated, like it was down in the south part of Site B. And so it's not in view of the people that buy those houses if we go that route. I'm still not convinced that there's a need for this community housing, personally. To take away this open space just to cram some housing in there, I don't think makes sense. And especially high density housing. We do have quite a bit of high density housing around the area within a mile. So I'm not sure why we would want to keep putting more in there. And I don't think Maplewood has the ability, police-wise, fire-wise, to really support high density.
Especially in the south end.
Especially in the south end, where we're a long ways from fire response.
And we never see police.
The comment that Robin just made, there are existing parks even in Maplewood. We got, Applewood, we got Pleasant View, we got other parks around. So I'm not sure that, that they're used, but not heavily. So we do have those facilities. Thank you, Maplewood. And those are, I love them. I love to go walking in them and be around them. So, but I don't know that we need a whole bunch more, to tell you the truth. So I guess my preference is very much leaning towards keeping as much open space as we can to make our community very valuable.
Can Maplewood support the golf course?
And also we were wondering, is an option for Maplewood to buy and support the golf course, or, have they looked at private entities coming in to do the golf course? And that's what I had. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. All right. Is Catherine?
Yes,
I don't see your
Catherine's
last
next,
name.
John. Yep.
Are you able to unmute yourself, Catherine?
Okay. There, am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. First, I do want to thank all of you from Perkins&Will and Institute on the Environment for the work that you've put in and some of the plans that you've drawn up, et cetera, et cetera. I will say, first of all, that I'm an environmental health scientist by profession, and that's a public health kind of subset. And I just have some comments. And first of all, in the introductory comments, I want to be sure to clarify that actually, in particular, Site A is not vacant land. It actually is habitat to a number of becoming increasingly rare bird species and other animals, including probably the federally endangered rusty-patched bumblebee, which is actually the state bee. And also that the United Nations, which I hope as we discuss the concerns for BIPOC communities, I hope folks consider that actually there probably isn't any more diverse entity than the United Nations. And then the United Nations just came out with a report called Make Peace with Nature, where they have stated through scientists around the world, and the executive director actually is a Latino person, that we are in a climate, extinction, and pollution crisis. And no more important right now than I think at any other time do we need to preserve habitat and open space. I don't think any of the other scenarios for these parcels will be nearly as valuable. We have other options for housing. People have repeatedly said we don't need more retail. And so I really think that the highest and best value for these parcels is protecting them for their ecological function. I'm concerned a little bit about the fact that throughout those scenarios, there was discussion about, we've got this little piece of environment here. Well, just a little chunk of environment, like my front lawn, is not necessarily ecologically functioning. It's green and it might absorb some water, but it's not an ecologically functioning space. So I really would like to encourage, particularly the powers that be on this call, to consider how important these parcels are from the human health perspective and from the perspective that we are in these crises and we have to start stepping up and addressing them rather than continuing our business as usual and continuing to think that we can sacrifice more of these spaces because it's death by 1,000 cuts. And we really have to be a lot smarter in the future. And I hope that we can do that starting with these two parcels. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Next up, John, is Ann Hutchinson.
Yeah, real quick, as we continue to have community members speak, looks like there's quite a long line. Likely, based on where we're at now, we won't be able to get through all the people that at least initially have raised their hands. So I would request that if some of you just want to type a question into the chat, we can document that. And then if there is anybody who has raised their hand that would like to speak that has any sort of new comments or anything that's different than what some of the other speakers have said, that would be greatly appreciated. So Anne, please.
Thank you. I won't take too long. I would agree very wholeheartedly with what Catherine said, and that especially Site A is habitat for some pretty unique grassland birds. Plus it adds, it continues the whole natural area of Battle Creek Park. So it extends that larger ecological place for habitat. If there's going to be any development, it seems like it would make more sense to do it on the golf course, because that's already very disturbed land, and at least you're not creating more disturbance. However, it seems like Maplewood has lots of opportunity for development in a lot of empty retail spaces. And I believe somebody mentioned that in the chat. So I would encourage the overall Ramsey County and the city to look at that. And so that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Ann. Daniel.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
You are.
Okay, I'd like to agree with Mary Lee Abrams. If we're going to develop something, go to Site A and keep the golf course. And Rachel in her comment said the site made $275,000 last year, which is great. It would be nice to be able to vote on the options, even though you pointed out it's probably not going to be one of those options anyhow. Those are just, you know, brainstorming. The deer, definitely, I live like a mile from the course. We don't bother having a garden. You got to get deer resistant plants. You need a very tall fence to do that. Is there a cost benefit to doing A and B development at the same time? That you get one contractor to come in and do it? Or could we do one and then the other and see how it goes? I'm curious on that. And then could Maplewood or somebody else buy the course and keep it running? And I like the idea of the bee habitat, you know, and the environmentalists that came on. That's really important. And I've seen some comments in the chat about Jim McDonald's comment in the paper about white privilege. It was in last Sunday's Pioneer Press. I'm not so sure it's white privilege as, hey, people just want to keep open space and keep it nice. I mean, on the street I live on, there's mostly Hmongs, I think, you know, in my neighborhood, and a guy from Eritrea. So yeah, I'm white, but I just want to keep the neighborhood nice. And more retail, I don't know that we need more retail. And the golf course supports the retail that we have now, the restaurant. So I'd kind of like to see it stay in, to be honest. I use it once in a while, but it's a very nice amenity to have the open space. So thank you. I like the thoughtfulness of the charts that you had, you know, the recreation, transportation, cultural services, etc. So of all the different lots. And somebody commented initially, hey, if we built a condo, you could raise it up and not take so much land, which is good too. But are we definitely going to do something on these sites? You know, one or the other or both? That somebody commented, Jim McDonough, yeah, here it is, that he's made it clear, yeah, Ramsey County wants to develop this for low-income housing. Is that the end result? Can somebody answer that? Or, you know, is that really the path we're on? If it is, okay, let's make it as nice as possible, but we have to not be naming, you know, white privilege. So thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Yeah, Daniel, thanks for the comments. I will note that as part of this planning process, we decided not to specifically talk to developers, especially housing developers, because we didn't want to influence, you know, some of the ideas that we would generate. And so as it relates to conversations with potential developers, the city nor the county has initiated any conversations. And you asked a lot of other great questions about future development potential and affordable housing. And we, as in the design team, Perkins&Will, and our partners, we're charged with just generating ideas without influence from sort of, you know, policymakers or decision makers. And so, you know, in our scenarios, we did map, you know, potentially what we thought a percentage of affordable housing would look like on each scenario. But again, ultimately, you know, we don't have any control of what's going to be built, and these were really just ideas to think about different options and how they tied back to our values and our goals and what we heard from the community. So, but thank you for your comments. As I mentioned, you know, we're getting short on time, so I'd really would hope that anybody who'd like to speak would maybe bring up some new topics or some new ideas. I think we've heard a lot about affordable housing to this point. I think we've heard a lot about maintaining the sites as the uses as they are, whether it's natural open space or golf courses. So I would hope that people who are speaking next could maybe touch on some different subject items. Cheryl?
Yes, I'll be quick, and it is different. What I'd like to ask is the payment for the report that you guys are producing, can we confirm that that's done by Ramsey County? And so your presentation of the information would appear that it is in support of what Ramsey County is looking for. And as a homeowner in Maplewood, I'm with Mayor Abrams in saying, you know, her presentation represents more of what the people of Maplewood want. And I really don't feel that your polls or the questions or the presentations or even how you have presented or collected the data represents those people that are adjacent to those properties. And I don't feel like there's an impact established as to what that does for the homeowners around those properties that built and bought here.
Yeah, thanks for the comment, Cheryl. Actually, our contract is with the city. And so we are paid by the city as part of this planning process. Now, there is a partnership between the city and the county, and I'm not privy to what that partnership or the financial makeup of that partnership is, but we are consulting with the city, under contract with the city, but working on county owned land, which is interesting in itself. So if that answers some of your questions, that's sort of the contractual relationship that we have.
And then I would just add, let's add more commentary from the people impacted. And Mayor Abrams, let us know if there's anything we can support the next time you meet with the governor.
Great. Any new comments from anybody else? We'll go to John.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, John.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I just want to thank you for all your work on this project, including everybody in a respectful way. And I want to thank you for including the no build option for both sites. There's a couple points that I wanted to highlight that were in the chat but have not been mentioned verbally. One was a point made by Julian Sellers about the fact that it's the size of the grassland in Site A is a big part of what makes it unique and particularly valuable as bird habitat. I think that's a key reason why we don't see those same kind of birds anywhere else in Maplewood. So that's a very important point. And then I noticed Ann Hutchinson also made the point that there are ways of getting more economic value from that bird habitat, developing a bird observation area, things like that, that are maybe between the no build and the next option up. And the last point I want to make is that I hope that out of this, the city will make a concerted effort to work with the county to find more appropriate sites for affordable housing. I believe there are such sites that is a significant need, and that is an effort that should be done in a parallel way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Always insightful comments. Steve, we have about 10 minutes and I want to be conscious of everybody's time. So Steve, any new thoughts or comments?
Yes, I'm unclear as to where to go on this because I really don't know what is pushing the effort to look at those two pieces of land. But some things that make me wonder, one is what are the plans for the correctional facility and the building and such where it is? If this project is 10, 20 years out, is that going to be impacted by whatever happens with the correctional facility? The other thing I have concerns about is whatever is the pressing issue that's making the county look at these two pieces of property. What is their ability to control what a developer actually does with it initially and long term to keep it in line with what their goals are? I don't have any, I'm a golfer and I don't object to the golf course going, but it has to go for a very good reason. We spent $5 million building that and it's not that old. So I need more idea of why this is such a priority and really what they want. And then I've got a better idea of what, as a citizen, I would be supporting and what they do. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I can't answer all your questions, but at least for the second part of one of your questions, the city has regulatory control over the sites. And so that will have an impact on what can be developed and how it can be developed. And then obviously the county as the owners of these sites, if they do decide to sell these sites, they have control over who they sell to, and they have control over what kind of development could happen in the form of legal language, contractual language, MOUs, things like that. And so there are some mechanisms that can be used to ensure that an equitable development or equitable outcome is reached on these sites. Pam.
It's Kevin on Pam's computer.
Oh, sorry. Hi, Kevin.
That's fine. Thanks for the presentation. This has been very good. I just think we have some history here. About 20 years ago, the citizens of Maplewood decided that we'd have our taxes go up so that we could buy open space. And it was a pretty successful program. If in fact the desire of the community is to keep those spaces open as open space or golf course or whatever, I would just propose that we put it back on the ballot. And if the city decides, if the voters decide that we should pony up and buy it, if the county is interested in just selling it to take the cash out, that's an option. If the county's desire is to do something else with it, that's a whole different issue. But I just wanted to point out that we've got some history here. We've done this before. We spent the money. The referendum passed very, very well, and it could again. So that's all I have to say. Thank you much.
Thank you, Kevin, for those comments. All right, Al. I want to make sure that we get to Danielle at the end here. So I think Danielle will be our last speaker. So Al. I think we can hear you, Al. Are you? You're back on mute, Al. Okay, why don't we go to Trevor and then we can come back to Al maybe. Trevor Foster, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, okay, perfect. So I'm a law student taking a land use class, and I'm just wondering, you talked a little bit about how Perkins&Will was tasked with creating design strategies without regard to policymakers and decision makers, how the city has regulatory control and the county has control of the purchase of the sites. Can you speak more to how your proposals fit into the city's development plan, the county's development plan, and then the Met Council's development plan? Thank you.
I can speak at a high level, from the standpoint of how the city has identified this in their land use plan, as well as how it's identified in the zoning. It wouldn't, those plans would have to be changed or updated. So there would have to be a zoning change for a majority of the developments that or scenarios that we presented tonight to happen. So that's really the regulatory tool from the standpoint of the city. From the county standpoint, the development scenarios are intended to, again, balance the input that we receive through community engagement, whether it's a public meeting like this, or whether it's these kind of focus groups, conversations with these maybe groups that are more representative of some of the needs throughout the county, and really balance the design scenarios with the goals and the desires and values from the county, which are at a high level, identified at a county level, and without being able to specifically state the goals, but we know that they're focused on affordable housing, equity for all, economic inclusion, economic growth, as well as really kind of fostering new open space for the next generation of the population of the county. And so our charge was to listen and balance all the needs and desires. And for all of you who have been part of these conversations over the last couple months, you've heard everybody, a lot of people are coming at this from many different perspectives and identifying many different needs and desires for these sites. But they're not only about these sites, it's about the county as a whole and what other things the county can offer to the citizens of the county. And so that was really sort of our approach, and hopefully I've covered some of the regulatory pieces that are in play as part of that. Is it Danielle or Daniela? Can you unmute?
Hi, it's Danielle.
Hi, Danielle.
Thank you for calling on me. I'm sorry, I was having trouble finding the hand raising option. Okay, I have a few things and I'll try and make them as brief as possible. So my first comment would just be about your plans that you showed us for both the sites. I thought that they were generally pretty good, and I thought the visibility of them was really nice. However, I think it would be beneficial to perhaps include some legends in with those, because there was a lot of different green colors. Before you explained what the community garden was, I had no idea what that was. The other thing I was thinking of, okay, they're showing trails, but do these trails connect to anything? And if so, where do they go? That's kind of just something I wanted to point out about your plans. But some of my questions are actually, has any thought been given to how the stormwater is going to be managed in these areas, particularly as they become potentially developed? Because, when you're developing parcels like this, that increases a lot of stormwater runoff, and it goes to different areas than it naturally would if it were left. And not even just thinking about Site A, for example, but also Site B, the larger site to the south. You guys showed that you were keeping those ponds that are at the golf course, but are those ponds going to be able to adequately handle the amount of runoff, sediment and pollutants coming into them? And then my other question, basically, or food for thought, would be, if we want to keep these areas more natural, which I'm personally the biggest fan of, how will we manage those natural resources, those environmental sites? Because as a land manager myself, I know that it's not good to just leave the area and not do anything. I mean, it would be great if maybe the city had a forester, or the county had foresters or natural resources managers that could go in there and make sure that it doesn't get completely overrun with, buckthorn and multiflora rose, a lot of invasives, make sure that it's, being really well sustainably managed to create a really high quality habitat for wildlife, birds, insects, and for potential recreation enjoyment by everyone else. And that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, really great points. And I think you're spot on, especially with stormwater and sort of the natural resources pieces. And, I think that's partially why we included it in as 2 of the 6 frameworks for what we think are important considerations on if future redevelopment does happen on either of these sites. And so my hope is that we can include some language around a little bit more detail about those 2 components. So, you know, we don't want to be designing for stormwater for like a 10-year rain event, because obviously that's not the condition and the situation that we're in anymore moving forward. And I would love to be able to incorporate some language around more intensive stormwater management on future redevelopment sites, something that not only takes care of stormwater on the specific site, but then maybe even takes stormwater from adjacent sites. And so thank you for the points, and we would definitely love to enhance and embellish some of the language that would be included as part of the framework for those 2 components. We are at 6, but I do want to let I think it's Debbie Singer, right? Speak, because I did see a chat come up that she's having a hard time unmuting. So can we help her unmute, and then we'll let Debbie speak, and then that'll be our time.
Actually, it's her husband Al. And
oh, it is Al. Okay. Sorry,
So-
Al. I saw Debbie in the chat. So okay.
Sure.
Well, go ahead, Al.
I thank you very much. I think you've done a great job in really trying to frame the complexity and the options that are possible here on the site. For context, I have been walking Battle Creek for 30 years. I was involved in the passage of the bond referendum, and I'm a professional land manager with another county. And the one piece that I think, and I think one of the preceding people spoke about it, is we're looking at these 2 sites as in sort of isolation. The future of the Correctional Institute and the adjacent lands, I think, are really critical as people think about how these function in the larger landscape. I'm a little concerned about the trails that you've shown coming onto Lower Afton Road, sort of mid-block, and where are people going to go? Are they going to dart across the road and have safety issues? Same thing with wildlife. And so I think it's really important to be able to show the adjacent land uses, both the neighbors to the west of the golf course and the Correctional Institute. And those pieces need to be taken into account as you think about how these 2 other parcels function. And finally, one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in is not community gardens, but actually urban agriculture. And there is a group called the Agrarian Trust that is starting in this part of Minnesota that might be an option to look at in terms of being able to provide a different kind of venue so that food production is maximized, and maybe they could take advantage of the facilities at the Correctional Institute. So thanks again for your work, and I'll be interested to see how this plays out.
Great, thank you, Al, and thanks for waiting. So that I think that brings us to our time together. Again, thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us here tonight and provide feedback on this project. I will note that, as I mentioned, hopefully I mentioned before, is that we will be turning these the polling questions into a survey, and we will make sure that that survey is up probably by Friday. As you saw, as we went through the presentation, there was a couple of things that we have to fix in the presentation. There was a couple of graphics that were inserted wrong. So we are going to update that presentation and put the polling questions into a survey and get it up on the city's website, hopefully by Friday. So please go to that. The questions will generally be the same, but there'll be an opportunity to actually expound on your responses. So in the polling, it's a little bit challenging to allow people to essentially write in a response, but as part of the survey, we're going to want you to write in your responses, and then we'll document that information. And still, we'll be working on this for a couple more months here. please feel free to reach out. The design team, the city, Michael Martin at the city, or Martha Faust at the county, and ask any additional questions. Feel free to send me an email if you want to ask any additional questions, and we will do the best that we can to provide a response. And if you're part of a organization or a group and you'd like to have an additional conversation, please let Mike Martin know, and we'll see if we're able to accommodate you as part of this process. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And with that, I'll turn it back to all of you and bid adieu. Thank you.